Hey there, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com, and in this lesson we're going to make an application with a view hierarchy controlled by a UI navigation controller. So basically what we're going to have here is we're going to have an application that when launched will display a table view nested in a navigation controller, and when the first row in the table view is selected or pressed, one view will appear on screen. But when the second row in the table view is pressed, a different view will appear on screen. You've seen this, I'm sure, in many applications that you may have downloaded from the App Store. It's quite common and it's very appropriate for many applications, if not most. So let's create the new project first. As always, we're going to start with a window-based application so you can see how the whole process is run through. We'll name this nav controller. Okay, so now first we're going to open mainwindow.zib and we're going to create a navigation controller. So of course we have all the default instances here, the nav controller app delegate instance, the app delegate class, and the default window. So we're going to create a navigation controller in which we're going to nest everything else. So basically the entire application is going to be in a view controller. Now we're going to do this step by step because it is a semi-complex process, and if we don't do it in a step-by-step process, everything might not seem to come together at the end. So we're going to do things in pieces, so to speak. So first, what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure that the navigation controller appears in this window. So we need to add this navigation controller as a subview to the window. So let's go back to Xcode and create an interface builder outlet that we will connect to the navigation controller that we just created. Main nav controller, we'll call it. Remember, we have to save this. Once saved, go back to interface builder and make the connection. So right click and drag from the nav controller app delegate class to the main nav controller to the navigation controller that we created and connect it to the main nav controller outlet. So now if we save this and go back to Xcode and go to the navcontroller appdelegate.m file, in the application did finish launching method, which of course is going to be called right as the application is done setting itself up, isn't about to be launched or about to display on screen, we're going to actually add this nav controller as a subview to the main window, main nav controller. Now, a navigation controller is not exactly a view, but it's an object that contains some information which helps it draw out a view. So a navigation controller has a property called view, and that view is an instance of UI view specific to that navigation controller. So basically a navigation controller has all these properties, a title for each level of the hierarchy. It's a hierarchy of view controllers, a navigation bar, and all these things. And by grabbing the view of that navigation controller, all those details and properties will be sent to a view and drawn out on that view so as to basically create a visual display or a visual representation of that navigation controller. So, of course, when adding a subview and using the add subview method, we have to pass in a view as the parameter. So we need to pass in its view property. So now if we save this and launch the application, we will have a navigation controller with a white view underneath it. And here you can see, title being view controller, a navigation bar with no actual view. So the next step is to actually add in a view. So a navigation controller, a UI navigation controller instance that is, controls a hierarchy of UI view controllers. So you can pass in views that you want the navigation controller to display by storing these views in different UI view controllers and telling the navigation controller to display these view controllers at a given time. When passing in a view controller for the navigation controller to display, the navigation controller will add that view controller to an internal array that stores the hierarchy of view controllers. So basically, navigation controller does a lot of work for you because it will keep track of the hierarchy of views that you're passing in, or view controllers. So let's go back to Interface Builder and create the default or root view controller. So we need to drag on an instance in the instance window of view controller. And of course, when the application launches, like I said, it's going to display a table view with two rows. One that, when selected, forwards to one view, and the other, when selected, forwards to a different view. So now, let's give this view controller a title. Open the inspector window. If you don't already have that open, you can open it by navigating to Tools, Inspector, and press the Attributes button. Again, I'm going to have to actually select the view controller and then give it a title. So, root view. Now, we need to tell the navigation controller to start off basically with this root view controller. So when the application first launches, we want it to display this root view. So we need to make another outlet to reference that view. IB outlet UI view controller root view. Now if we save this and go back to Interface Builder, we can right click and drag to the root view controller we just created and connect the root view outlet. Now let's save this and go back to code. So now this view controller we can reference using the root view instance variable that we just connected it to in the nav controller app delegate class. So let's go to the .m and let's set the root view of the navigation controller as, or to the root view that we just connected with the root view instance variable. So as it turns out, there are only two ways to truly initialize a navigation controller with a root view controller, and that is by using some properties in Interface Builder, which we're not going to go over today, but that don't apply here, and to make an instance of a navigation controller using only code. But you can see that we actually created our navigation controller in Interface Builder. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the view controller's property of a navigation controller and pass in or set it equal to an array containing only the root view. So main nav controller view controllers equals ns array with object root view. And so we're passing in an array containing only the root view. So as you might imagine, you can put in as many view controllers as you'd like in this array, and the navigation controller will store these views as a hierarchy, depending on which, the order that they're given in the array. We only want one here, so we only passed in one in the array. So this array contains only the root view controller. If we build this now, you can see that the title has been changed and we have the outline of a table view. So another interesting property about navigation controllers is that they set their titles to the title of the view controller they're currently displaying. So you can see that the title here is root view. The navigation controller got that from the view controller we just set as the root view. So navigation controllers don't actually store a personal title for each view in the hierarchy, but rather they just grab it from the view controller being displayed at that time. Now let's actually fill in the table view. So we're going to, again, of course, use the data source protocol or the data source outlet for the table view, and we're going to do this all in the app delegate class. So let's make the connection here. Let's right-click and drag from the table view to the nav controller app delegate class and connect the data source outlet. Now, let's go back to Xcode and pass or fill in the methods that we need to in the data source protocol so that the table view actually displays the data. So the first is number of sections in table view, UI table view, table view. We only want one section here, so we're just going to return 1. Now, table view, UI table view, number of rows in section as integer section. Of course, we only have one section, so we can return a constant 2. We want a table view with only 2 rows and 1 section. And then the final method, the one that we're going to use to return the cell that we want for any given section and row, table view, UI table view, table view, cell for row at index path, ns index path, index path. Now let's fill out this long implementation. First, we're going to, of course, create the initial cell and check to see if the table view has used a cell with the identifier main cell. In the case that it hasn't, we're going to create this initial cell with set identifier, cell equals UI table view cell. Now, as I implement this method here, I'm assuming that you have watched the lesson on how to populate a table view with data. If you are confused as what's going on right now, you can watch that and this will make a lot more sense. Init with style, UI table view cell style default, reuse identifier main cell, and auto release. Now, depending on which row is currently being drawn, let's set the appropriate cell text. So cell text label text equals view push view 1. That is, if we're drawing row 1, we'll set, or row 0, let's set the text to push view 1 for the cell. Else if index path row equals row 1, cell text label text equals push view 2. And of course, we return the cell and close the method. So now if we build the application, we'll have a table view on screen nested in navigation controller with 2 rows. The first one saying push view 1 and second one saying push view 2. Now, of course, pressing these buttons actually doesn't do anything, or selecting these rows doesn't actually do anything. So we need to piece that together. So to be informed that a cell in a table view has been selected, we use another protocol called the UI table view delegate protocol. A delegate protocol, or a delegate outlet, receives messages when certain events happen to a table view. So, for example, when a row in the table view is selected, the table view sends a message to its delegate informing it exactly which row was selected. So again, we're going to do everything through the nav controller app delegate class. It's nice to keep everything organized there and have that do all the controlling. We're going to connect the delegate outlet. The method we need to use here is table view UI table view table view did select row at index path, ns index path, index path. And you can see here that very simply, when the table view has a row selected by a user, it will send a message to its delegate in this form, table view, and then it'll pass itself, did select row at index path, and it'll pass in an index ns index path instance containing the section and row at which the row was selected. Now we want to respond to this, but first we actually need to create two new view controllers to be pushed onto the screen. So we're going to close this and not actually do anything yet. We'll save this and we'll go back to Interface Builder. Now let's create two other view controllers. So first one, to avoid confusion, view controller 1. We're going to open this, and you can see that a view controller, this bordered gray area here with the text view in the middle, means that there is no actual view here. So basically it's empty or nil. This is a view controller, not a view. So its job is to control a view. We need to give it a view to control. So let's drag out an instance of UI view into the center here. And this will be the UI view instance that this view controller will control. And again, navigation controllers only take instances of UI view controllers to add into their hierarchy. So we need to use UI view controllers. Let's put in a label here, view1, and we'll give this view controller a title. So select the title bar here, and we'll give it title view1. Enter. Now let's create our second view. We'll do the same thing here. But wherever we had view 1, we'll put view 2. Click the title and give it the title view 2. Now, we now have our two view controllers that are going to be pushed onto screen. Now let's go back to Xcode and add two new outlets, one for the first view controller and one for the second. IB outlet UI view controller view 1 and IB outlet UI view controller view 2. If we save this and go back to Interface Builder, we can connect the outlets. Now, the outlets are connected appropriately, and the instance variable view1 of the nav controller app delegate class is connected to the first view controller, and the instance variable view2 is connected to the second view controller. Now we can save this and go back to Xcode and fill out the delegate method that we began implementing earlier. So, if index path .row equals 0, we're going to want to push into the navigation controller or onto the navigation controller the first view. Push, there's a method that navigation controllers respond to called push view controller animated. The first parameter is, of course, the view controller we want to be pushed onto the screen inside of the navigation controller. And the second parameter is whether or not we want this push to have an animation along with it. So if you pass in yes, the previous view will slide off the screen to the left and the new view will slide onto the screen. If you set no, the new view will simply appear on screen immediately. Of course, we want this to look nice, so we're going to put animated yes. Of course, else if index path.row equals 1, main nav controller push view controller view 2, animated yes. Now if we build our application, selecting the first view pushes on view 1, and selecting the second view pushes on view 2. Now you can see here that when a view is pushed onto the navigation controller, it very nicely adds a back button with the title set as the previous view on screen, and clicking this back button steps back to the previous view. You can see that navigation controllers do a lot of the work for you, and they allow you to create very powerful applications very easily. This view hierarchy is very nice and very seamless, but it only took us a few minutes to create. Well, I'm Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune in for future lessons. I'll see you next time.